All right, so a little bit about our starting premise. We teach very different kinds of classes. We have different work backgrounds, but we all start from the point of view that we want to build in all our students' professional identities that include an understanding of social justice issues, equity, fairness, a desire to use their professional training to give back in some ways. We know they'll follow different career paths, but we want them, that's one of our goals when we teach. We use the terms very broadly in order to have as many students as possible see themselves in the model. So social responsibility, social justice, racism, doing the right thing, giving back, thinking of things beyond profits, having a sense of morality. It doesn't have to include all those things, and it won't for all students, but the bigger our tent, probably the more people we can welcome in is our lot. It's certainly not where everyone starts, and I don't know that you certainly don't have to have that ethos when you teach an externship course, but it is really one of the places that we start and where our core is. And I think, this for me, I was a rights lawyer, so for me, racism, inequality in our system, social justice work is part of who I am. I kind of can't help myself. I was saying to somebody last year, and I was really angry at some point, like every day. I bought like 20 posters that, Black Lives Matter, equal right to human rights, just all over. So I wear who I am on my sleeve for all my students.
I'm talking a little bit about who we're teaching, which I don't think is a surprise to any of you. We are teaching at the moment millennials, and we've all heard the bad, that they need all this feedback and hand-holding and all of that. But the good is that they really are a creative group. As of next year, they'll be the largest living generation. Baby boomers are starting to shrink, while this group is going to be very large. They are, I think, this is also backed up by reading, but I also notice more open-minded, and they are supportive of gay rights, equal rights. I mean, these are concepts that have sort of been in their ether for a long time. 81% expect companies to make a public commitment to social response, to good corporate citizenship. There's another term. So they are interested on a basic level. But I said that that's who we're teaching right now. Pew announced as of 2 weeks ago, newsflash, Gen Z has arrived. They will be 22 this year. I have a Gen Zer and I have a millennial, but actually 96 to 2010. So the youngest ones are starting law school. And while the millennials, I think many of us know, are focused on, they know the economy is uncertain, they've been exposed to job uncertainty, many of them. So they like security. I think the Gen Z, I'm still getting used to them, even more so. They're more private. They don't like Facebook, they'd rather be on Snapchat. They've gotten the message, maybe they don't need their whole history in public. Cultural diversity. They are generally more aware multiculturally. There's diversity is growing in many colleges and law schools. That's good news, and more is needed, but it's making progress. They're drawn to safety. They wear their seatbelts and they don't drive and drink more than the millennials. But at the same time, I mean, same-sex marriage has been legal for their period of really coming of age. The last president, the president who was president for most of their coming of age, was African American. They're the first generation for whom a phone is a location finder, a video game, a electronic telegraph, and a library. And they may choose to submit a listicle, which I just gave you, as an admissions essay. This comes from Beloit, does this kind of interesting who is coming in now. And they're likely to have participated in active shooter drills, which, yeah. Wow. So safety, security, and caring about public issues, I think the Parkland students are Gen Z, There's real hope there, I think.
So at the same time, I think, and maybe I often feel like I have a very pessimistic view, but I think there's a lot of challenges in pulling together the diversity of the students you have and maybe their intended career path. In just my short experience, I think Sometimes students come to the externship class with very narrow views of what their externship experience should be. They're really focused on the field work. They see it as a resume booster, maybe to develop their skills as well, but very much resenting the extra work of the course beyond the field work. And I have a 2-credit seminar, so I actually expect quite a bit in terms of extra reading and writing as part of that. I think some students too at the same time, they know about the current events, but they don't necessarily tie it to where they see themselves going in terms of, if they're pursuing corporate law or some sort of law firm career. Or they might not understand how that fits in with the access to justice gap, the role that they may have in terms of corporate responsibility or pro bono work. So I think it's often easier to talk about social justice work. My first semester, I had students almost entirely in criminal law placements, which was very different than the work I had done, but it was very easy to talk about social justice in that context because everyone was seeing it readily in their placement. But now I actually have more students in corporate counsel externships mixed in with my students that are doing government and public interest work. And it's become more challenging to have those discussions in the seminar as a result because people are in such different places. And my assignments that ask about access to justice, for example, just are difficult for the students that are doing a lot of contract work for it to resonate with them right away.
So, just to give you a little flavor, you've heard some of the things that help us teach this, some of the things that are challenging. So we wanted to illustrate the challenges because that's more fun with a quick role play. So I'm going to be the professor of an externship class with mixed placements. June is going to be a student in my class, and Laura is going to be the inner voice of June.
That's fabulous.
So, okay, everybody, today's topic is social justice work, pro bono, and corporate social responsibility, and the role that lawyers play in that work. We'll be discussing some of the articles that you read for class, as well as how this issue plays out in your placement.
I thought this class was about what our externship is. We don't do that stuff in my placement. Will this be part of my grade?
Why do we have reading for this class? It was supposed to be an externship. I did it to help me get a job, not having more reading to do. And what in the world is corporate social responsibility? Sounds like an oxymoron.
Well, the role of the class is to enhance the learning that you're doing through the externship and to raise some larger issues that aren't always evident in your day-to-day work.
So I'm actually planning to be an M&A lawyer, so I don't get how this applies to me. So maybe we could just separate out my things so that the students who are doing corporate law can discuss it and the rest of us could discuss something more related to the placement.
Why does this lefty professor come up with these goofy topics? Does she even understand how things work in the real world?
Okay, so luckily we don't always hear the inner voices of our students, but sometimes we imagine what they might be, right? So we will certainly give you some thoughts about this, but we'd love to hear ideas. Any of this familiar? And if so, how do you try to deal with it in your classes? Ideas? Shares? Or no, your students are all totally into social justice. None of them are going to be M&A lawyers, yeah.
So, totally familiar of all of the inner voice and outward voice. One of the things that I have done with my students is I give them options of certain topics to write about, and one of those, or a couple of them, have to do with social justice issues. And so every student is not going to write about that because it doesn't resonate with them, but because it very much, I think, is the attitude of students, if this does not relate to my field work and I see no connection to this ever in my life, why in the world am I having to do this? And they don't buy into that, and then it becomes this, horrible resentfulness for all the coursework. And so I feel like that's been a way for me to try to expose people and think about things in a different way, and how even how that applies to their externship, even if it's not obvious, like even if you're not in a public interest externship, this could apply to you, and it does relate to what you're going to be doing as a lawyer. So that's just one way I've tried to deal with that.
Other ways in, other ways to get them. Yeah, Sue?
I find they respect each other a lot, so I actually do a lot of student interaction, a lot of like small group, talk to your neighbor, what do you think? I purposely put them like, a legal services person talking to someone at the SEC, or so, and try what's the common ground, what's the not common ground. And then even in one of our classes, the students take responsibility for, we line up the guest speaker, but the 3 students take responsibility for sending the outline, communicating with the outside, and so they feel invested in that class, and then they're kind of excited by the time they actually get to meet the social justice, hardcore radical person we're bringing in to speak. And they've been prepped about who the students are, and so they tend to buy in a little bit more that way.
That's great. Yeah?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts, and I don't have any magical words at all. One thing is that I've learned that I can't use the term social justice with my students because it's like a trigger word for some people, and apparently it means controversial things to some of my students. So I talk about public service, and in the first class, I always have them, because some of our students who are doing externships haven't yet taken professional responsibility. So we spend the first couple of class meetings talking about the rules of professional conduct generally, and I always have them read the preamble to the rules and look at the language about attorneys having that special responsibility for the quality of justice. And so I at least try and get that sort of framing out there at the beginning of the course so that they won't be so taken back at that time for these issues.
Yeah, good point, though, right. They respect each other sometimes more than us, and language matters, which is why we said we'll call it lots of different things, whenever we get them to see themselves in it.
Right, I didn't know, I didn't realize that social justice was an issue, like a term like that. I learned that through college.
Very good. I think that next we're going to talk about some of our class topics, right, June?
Yes, so I think for the purposes of this discussion, because I feel like there's so many different ways we could go with how to introduce social justice, we were thinking that we would focus on a mixed class, and particularly talking about how to include students in law firms or corporate placements. We thought that was something that we found particularly challenging. So given my background and my role, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the corporate counsel role and ideas that might resonate for students doing that kind of work that pull in these concepts of social responsibility and social justice. And then Cindy will talk a little bit more about the access to justice gap, and then Laura will talk about drawing from the headlines to pull into a mixed class that might help to relate to students in a mixed placements too. So there's a handout with various readings and exercises also for a large range of seminars, both single subject, public interest, and mixed classes.
There's a bunch down here, so yeah.
We can pass that out as well. But something that I thought was a little different, and I didn't realize until I was in in-house practice, is the role of a corporate counsel is very different than when you work in a law firm. And the work that you do when you counsel a diverse group of business contacts on a day-to-day basis really forces you to examine what the role of the attorney is, your internal value system, and a lot of ethical implications that aren't readily apparent. You're both a partner with the business, and you're also counseling the business on what is not just what's legal, but also what's right to do. And so it's really important for the attorneys in a company to really understand that they're the conscience of the company and to have that as part of their professional identity. So I think of this as a bit of a continuum, because I want my students first to think about their professional identity and their values, and then from that understand or think about their responsibility all the way to how they might contribute to social justice. So one of the exercises that I've put together to flesh out the values and the role of an attorney in a corporation is to do a bit of a case study on the GM ignition switch issue. For those of you who remember, it's the year where the GM discovered after many years that dangling key rings would cause the ignition switch in certain Chevy Cobalts to move out of the on position. It would shut off the engine. They did not realize it would also turn off the airbags. And actually, this was eventually traced to, I think, something like 127 deaths. And it took a long time to spot this issue, and I think that there was a lot written on missed opportunities by the lawyers for leadership on the issue, for elevating it appropriately, for really spotting it. And so I think this is a case study that could be used to pull out those issues, and the reason I pick the GM issue is because all of the documents from it are available publicly because there was a congressional probe. So what I've done is I pulled out the ones that I think show a timeline of the issue so that students can go through, they can piece it together, they can do a little bit of a chronology as if they were doing their own internal investigation or doing discovery. So they develop some of those skills, but at the same time they're putting together the story and understanding this was where things went wrong, and this is something that's important to have communication and leadership, and to really recognize when it happens. I think you could do this with other cases, maybe ones that have more of a direct, obvious social justice orientation too, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But I kind of put that at the beginning of this continuum of talking about values for corporate attorneys. Going along that, I also think that this introduces us to the concept of I think lawyers as professionals, as public citizens, and having that as part of your responsibility as a professional. So one thing that I've thought a lot about is how corporations use corporate social responsibility to help individuals within the company make day-to-day decisions, and how lawyers can also use that as a tool when they counsel clients. So I think you could do an exercise with corporate counsel students, perhaps around identifying what their corporate value statements are, and how that might matter for their legal departments, for example, or even identifying some companies with very strong value statements. I think Starbucks, Patagonia all have very clear identities and corporate cultures, and I think that's different, but also very relevant to their day-to-day life. I think there's also a lot of current events with activist shareholders pushing for social responsibility and things like that that could be pulled in. I think there was an article about BlackRock not very long ago making a statement that this was an obligation from companies. So, and then going closer to kind of doing the direct work itself, I think it's important to talk with students about pro bono work and what that looks like. I think it's maybe a given for law firms, but more corporations are doing it, and it's very helpful for students to understand that that is something that is available to them regardless of what career path they choose. And I think maybe it's because in Iowa we have a relatively small legal market, so we don't see as much of that direct tie of large law firms participating in impact litigation and things like that that we might in a larger city. So I think you could do exercises on what pro bono work is, interviewing lawyers in your placement, and what kind of pro bono work they do to introduce that awareness. So,
yeah, I want to talk about the justice gap. So one of the things I think that many people in the country, including many law students, have no idea that people in civil cases have no right to an attorney, right? They kind of know about Gideon and they read about it in criminal law, and many people presume the same thing. Surely, if you were going to lose your children or your housing or your source of income, you would get to have a lawyer. And so often you have to walk them through if that's actually not true. We don't get that. And that there are, so help them understand all the important issues that do get decided deportation on the civil side of the courts. Also help them debunk this, there's too many lawyers. No, actually there's not too many lawyers, of course. There's not enough lawyers serving the people who really need, the moderate and low income clients who could really use the work. So there's also, of course, the unprofitable, unpopular causes that the private legal market is just not going to tackle. Abortion, immigration rights, environmental rights, all those kinds of things that are out there not being covered. And that our federal government funds these at a relatively low level. Tell them about the Legal Services Corporation. Tell them that it has been under attack for many, many years, and once again is under attack. That Trump's budget zeroes out LSC, so we would have no. In some states, there's some state funding, but certainly that's not going to be enough. There are some nonprofits doing the work, but not nearly enough. I think also it's really important for students to know that corporations and pro bono lawyers do care about this stuff. There's lots of places doing lots of pro bono work. If you read the corporate list of people who support LSC funding, it's pretty impressive. Same thing with law firms. This is not just, again, this tiny group of lefty liberal lawyers who care about this. This is fairly widespread. And I think part of what helps them understand this is because when I say, and think about representing yourself. You're going through 3 years of law school at least. And frankly, once you come out, you still won't be very good at it. So imagine if you've done none of that and something really important is at stake. And if you've ever been to a courtroom, you're the one standing up there by yourself with no legal training to try to represent yourself. And for them, a lot of them, that hits them. They get that. They get that it's hard what they're doing and that without their training, it would be almost impossible to do. So I try to facilitate class discussions on the Justice Gap once they understand it. Who should be responsible for addressing it? Should it be the government? Should it be private law firms? Should we tax all the lawyers? Should we, tax all the soda? I mean, there's lots of, what are the ways that we might want, assuming it's a problem we want to tackle, what are the different ways? And there's not necessarily one right way or one wrong way. Back to a little bit on Sue's idea that they listen to each other. So then I assign every student to find an article that talks about the Justice Gap and perhaps some solution. And it can be anything they want, and that's partly the joy in it, because they can find something that speaks to them. So then I'll have a student come back and say, well, did you know there's these self-help desks in the courthouse, and they're helping, like, yes, I did know that, but good, yes. If you're a person who, that's one of your, ways, philosophies, self-help is good. Or a rural student comes back and say, did you know there's only one legal services lawyer for every, 20 counties in downstate Illinois? I'm like, yeah, you're right, and think about that. Think about how hard that is. It isn't just an urban problem, it's very much a rural problem. So then I have my students post that on our discussion board. They have to read at least 2 articles and respond to it. So then when they come to class, they're in charge of presenting their own article, and at least 2 people in the room have read it, which hopefully leads to a better discussion. So like I said, we have lots of exercises we've given you in our writing that we haven't covered here, so you'll leave with a good list. And now Laura's going to talk about using real-world examples to help Greek students.
I will say one thing that's different between my UCI and USC experiences is that I didn't have corporate placements. I do now have corporate placements. Came from a place very much like Iowa, where there's sort of this ethos very clear from the beginning of public service is part of the goal of being a law student. Not so much at USC. So whatever placement your students are in now, if they are in a judicial placement, they may be aiming for big law. They may be aiming for corporate counsel. So the attitudes that it's bringing are not just what they're in now, but you're trying to pull them in from wherever they're coming from. And this can be hard. It can be very hard. You can get classroom of inner students. So sometimes, I will go back again to what Sue said, which is pretty much, I think we all agree with, that sometimes you have to hand some responsibility to them, sort of hit them on the head with it so that they will engage. But something that I found useful, looking for articles, local articles, national articles, what's going on? Are there cases? Are there events going on that have social impact? Or social responsibility issues come up, or justice in a very basic sense. Again, I forget who it was that said, the label social justice can be dangerous, or at least with some students. So pulling something that's going on right now can happen. Sometimes you can't get all the students in one. There may be something going on in criminal justice that you can get your criminal students, some of your government students that are more prosecutorial, and possibly your judicial students. But the gold standard, if you can find it, is something that really has a role for everybody to sort of start to see a problem. But you got to think outside the box. For instance, I was thinking about this. This is, for your students, this will be history. Enron. Oh, wait a minute. Well, wait a minute. California, rolling blackouts, access to power, price going up. Investors, including small-time investors, losing their investments. It's not the big guys who usually lose their jobs, with a few exceptions. It's the lower-level workers. So a lot of people were affected by this criminal activity. So pull people in different ways that they connect. They can connect. Our exercise in a minute is going to be very timely. It's about sexual harassment, which has a big social component. And the Me Too movement. Obviously, these are really present. And it's affecting everywhere. It's in corporations, it's in law firms, it's in the judiciary, as Judge Kaczynski demonstrated so well. It happens in every walk of life. So this is something that your students will likely connect to, though. I tried to address it with my students at the beginning of this semester, and they were all these late millennial, early Gen Zs. And I said, so how many of you have experienced this? One woman who looked a bit older put her hand up. And I started demonstrating it, stuff that many of us experience, which, somebody starts coming closer and closer. Anyway, they may not know about it, but they're mad at the concept if they haven't experienced it themselves. Political, again, tricky, but the Parkland students. There are issues where people are starting to change their minds. There are issues where it's really an opportunity to pull from all those sources about talking across gaps, gulfs, political, social. And there are issues that really matter to people. And social, guns, murder, mass death. There's a social responsibility aspect there. We may not think of it that way, but it's there. Going back to Sue's point, turning it over to them. Depending on the size of the class, you may have 2 or 3 students working together, but have them do the presentation. Have them pick something from their area. If you've got in corporate counsel, some of you have law firms, have them find something that they feel implicates where they are. Maybe they even ask the attorneys at their office. So is there something where you can see corporate responsibility or social responsibility or basic justice in the work you do? It's disturbing sometimes how often they come back with, no, they don't. It's a little frightening, which is a chance to then have these conversations about, well, why not? And what can you see? Dig deeper, dig deeper. So I think that we're ready for the exercise. I think we are.
One thing on that. I think in the last year, there's a similar problem with students who either had been considering an externship with a federal agency and turned it down or decided not to pursue it, or who ended up doing an externship at a federal agency but had been feeling really guilty about that and feeling that perhaps the changes in the policies of that agency and the government in general have led them to feel the way you're describing. Some people may feel being in a corporation or in a law firm. And I've seen it, and I don't know if others have, so I just wanted to raise the that's a real change in.
Yeah, that dissonance.
It's almost like the local and state placements are the social justice,
Yes.
public interest placements. And anyone who goes to the federal government now is just kind of, getting a different kind of experience than they would have 2 years ago.
Yeah, students talk about their placements being kind of being protected, they're keeping their heads down. And then there are other students who are going, yeah, this is where I want to be. And you're going, okay then, do you understand that this agency, if it's environmental, might be disbanded at any time? I have one Office of Environmental something or other. It's like, well, they lost their head, they've lost half their staff. Those offices are out there too. And it's a growing number with the lack of placements being filled. But I think your point about them encountering this unexpected dissonance is really important.
Laura, you're going to introduce our assignment?
Okay, so all of you, do you need the cards? These are very beautifully done by June's assistant. So everybody should have one page that says social justice exercise, the handout. It's a case summary, and it tells you the different roles. And we're going to need to group you into 5 groups.
I think that we counted, so if you, about 4 in a group will probably get us 5 groups. It's 5, it's a little more, but there's 5 different roles, so we're going to do a little role play.
So do you want to,
You keep talking and I'll work this out.
okay.
So you said
All right.
4 in a group?
Yeah.
4 to 5 in a group, okay.
Maybe you guys move down.
I think she said 4 is okay. I know, exactly. So,
Wait, so how many, maybe one?
oh, I didn't read this.
How about, can you three move you to?
Yeah.
Can you three, I don't know, I just need 2 groups. However you do it. All right, there you go. Yeah. 4. Okay, is that good? Are you okay with being a group?
Is everybody in a group?
Okay, we'll be a group.
Okay, we're going to give you a minute to read the scenario.
So read the scenario first and then you read your role play.
I'm all for it.
We get a roll.
Okay. I know I realize it's hard for them all.
Yeah.
You'll have to share, sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe pass your
Oh, I actually took an extra one, I'm sorry.
No, the roles are
The roles are on the back.
Yeah.
So start with the scenario.
And then if you finished your scenario, I think you could read this. I don't
Yeah,
know.
once you finish the
Did you already read the
scenario,
scenario?
give me the role.
Okay, there you go.
Can you just tell us the scenario so we don't have to read it, we can read our role?
Well, okay, so this is about American Widgets, Inc. This is based on a true story. Some of you will recognize it. They've had factories scattered across the Midwest. One in particular, in Piscataway, has been problematic. They keep having sexual harassment problems. And the thing is that this started, well, became noticed. I don't think it started, but it became noticed in the mid-1990s. And finally, some African-American women went to the EEOC and eventually filed a federal district case. Well, those claims were settled around 1999, and there were millions, not billions, millions were there, and there was promises made and all of that stuff. They were going to do better. In 2014, it started with 4, and not surprisingly grew. 4 African American filed new complaints with the EEOC. And it's continuing gender and race-based harassment. Examples include male workers when a new woman came on the floor banging their tools on the bars and saying, "Fresh meat!" when a new woman entered. They also had people telling them, "You want to keep your job, so have sex with me." They turned to the union. First, their supervisors were saying, "The boys will be boys, just put it, live with it." They went to the union. Some of them wanted sex in exchange for keeping your job, and also put the pressure on of, well, you're going to make him lose his job if you continue with this. And if you did go ahead and report, everybody knew before you even got back from the supervisor's office, and you might find your tires slashed when you got to the parking lot. So, one reported, there was many stories of this. So basically, you are now each in the role, and we would have the individual students do this and then pass cards. If we're just doing one round of this. But for this, you all have your roles now, and have you all had a chance to read your roles? Okay. Yeah.
These are the roles, just so you know who else is in the room, these are all the players at work out.
Awesome job.
That'd be a fun job.
Well, we have to talk about problem solving.
Yeah.
It is good for it. That's wonderful.
So, as you talk through your role, you could also talk through your thoughts on these questions.
These are going to be the questions that we're going to be going around asking.
Yeah, we're the outside.
Yes. Right. Like saying, how did this come to be? Like, what does this actually look like? Here's what the judge decided.
So the questions that someone from your group was going to come back and report on are up here. So as you think about your role and how you feel about this case, think about these questions.
What is your view? It's a dog, yeah. I heard, I can't please remember, but I heard about this, and actually the settlement closed, and then it immediately started to happen. Whatever this was, I can't remember. Where it went into a monitoring phase, where that was like the next year, I can't remember what. So the client's one of them. It's tempting to say like, oh, I do ask this client, but I guess it's also the client is your client.
I can see
And there's the manifestation of the client. Yeah, the Right. And I report to the CEO. We report to the CEO. We report to the CEO.
Very personal.
You're talking to the CEO about how you're going to come on board. I'm not sure. I don't know. I think she was going to have those different parties and entities in mind. It's just a company as a as a block. Yeah. What was the next question? We took questions.
Yeah, can we have a question?
Oh, we need the questions back.
Oh, sorry, yeah, we're in the questions.
Let me check one thing and I'll get back to you.
Well, we've settled before, I guess, did we decide, as a lawyer, I mean, as a lawyer, the only thing I'm thinking is, we settled out of this before, if we don't want bad press, we can't litigate this, we can't let, so go forward. Yeah, but, so evaluating as a lawyer, and protecting the
client gets settled. So if I'm being
That's what I'm thinking. What it should be the case is, I don't start with this.
You know, I'm used to make a name for I think there is a real appreciation for us.
Well, they're not doing it, so no, it's our interest versus issues. I mean, they're not.
Like cause lawyers.
Support that,
There
like
were-
other facts, right, that, I said they were. Well, if they're saying, well, they're also like, but we don't know, right? I think that's a good point.
So maybe what the strength would be the facts or not.
Are we ready to report back? Yes, close enough, more time, report back, maybe? Who's the AWI's general counsel? Sue, is that you? Your hands up? Look at the back of your cards. Who's the AWI? No, they know. Who's the general counsel? Who is your in-house lawyer dealing with this? You guys
We are.
So what do you think? All right, guys, we're gonna share from your point of view. You're all looking at all these questions. We're gonna start with the general counsel's office for this lucky corporation.
We can pop around and answer, but I'll take the first one. So, who's your client? The client is the company, AWI, but we were none of us have done corporate work before, so we were sort of befuddled by who we're actually having make the decisions, if it's the board, who's the decision maker, if it's the board specifically, or if there's some way you direct contact with shareholders or get a sense of that. We didn't know, but we're talking about that.
And we're public interest lawyers, we don't know.
Some of the people in your class would be, right? So you
We like the
purposely
last
do it the
question,
next
that was our favorite one.
So maybe we can go ahead and skip over to that.
Do you want to do the last one?
Take a few views and strengths of your case. Come on.
So these are the cases as a lawyer. I mean, all I'm thinking, you know, the lawyer hat on is settle now. Like, right? We don't want any sort of reputation. My biggest concern is reputational damage. This is going to be a big problem, and there's going to be bad press if we decide to litigate. So settle is my view.
What about,
Personal view, we went their favorite parts of personal view. We let them
GDK.
do their personal.
Oh, okay.
It's disgusting.
It's disgusting. Just like
We don't know what we're doing being counsel to this corporation either.
Yeah, right.
We have no expertise in these matters.
Well, get them to do the right thing.
Yeah.
That's the strength, is this is gonna be a malpractice suit after this.
Well, the other thing we noted was that, of course, we don't have all of the facts. So, I mean, I would think we need a lot more investigation and find out what's really going on. Is this race-based discrimination? Is it gender-based? Is it both? Because we don't have those details.
What about GDK? The
So
law firm.
we're-
outside
Not
counsel.
everybody knows who, right? GDK's the law firm.
We're the law firm, and we want to fight this to the very end. We want millions of hours of billable hours in this case. So, I mean, we also did kind of that question, like, who's our client? Is it really, you know, is it Mr. CEO, assuming it's a Mr.? Is it the board with that part? And then, like, then our view of the case is, bad case. We started saying good case, but then we realized we were on the wrong side. But you know, obviously the strengths are not much evidence, documentation, weaknesses. You know, this is not a moment to be fighting a case like this. And then, given that this is now their second time they're fighting this, and all that, and our personal views of the case is, you know, I think the word slime ball came up in our. But you know, also what's good for the company? I mean, what's you know, in the best term interest of the company?
And what do you, I guess, do you have an opinion on what that would be?
Well, probably not fighting this till the end and getting all that bad publicity given, you you know, that they.
Given what AWI's just told you?
Yeah.
Be proactive and change the culture of the company.
Right.
That's good for the company.
I will just throw in that if we were doing this in a classroom and we had clear groups, we would give, if you're public interest, we're going to give you, the company. So we would be mixing you up. That would be, which gives people cover to say things too.
I think part of the idea was that would challenge your assumptions about your role, perhaps. I used to actually do this kind of an exercise in-house and put people in different roles and have them report back on how they would make certain decisions. So I would also sell this to the students as this is an exercise that you would do in real life. It's part of a brainstorming exercise. It's part of challenging your own assumptions and really kind of putting yourself in the shoes of others. So it's all kind of wrapped up in there as something that's done and is practical and real and not just, it's kind of a thought exercise. So, what about the union attorney? So this is the union in-house attorney.
So tell us about yourself. What's your view of your case?
I mean, our client is the union, presumably. All of the union members, including those that have been harassed. Yeah, and I think as a lawyer, when we were trying to do the same thing, where we'd be like, what can we decide? What structures can we put in place, to try and deal with this internally so that it doesn't arise at the level of so we don't get sued and then possibly bankrupt.
But I think tricky because the men are probably all union members too,
Well,
right?
exactly.
The people doing the harassing,
Exactly.
they're all union
Exactly.
members. And so
Yeah.
these are all your people,
Exactly.
right? Like, so do you just stay neutral? Do you say this is wrong? No,
I mean,
just,
we really like this role. To be honest, but I mean, I think we sort of saw it a little akin to the in-house counsel role, that like you're the role for the union, not each individual member, right? So it's a stinky position to be in, right? But that I think we thought we would say, or at least we sort of talked a little bit about things that were, what could we do that would sort of say we're doing this training and we're doing all this stuff, right, to change the kind of culture. And then potentially, I was like, well, maybe if we're trying to protect the union, maybe we can pretend that like not pretend, but like maybe the senior official would have the authority to like sort of say those kinds of things. Like one of the things being like, is there a process in place? Like if there is a complaint, like what is that process? Presumably, I would think a union would have a process. But so maybe like if we can say that protocol wasn't followed, it might help us deter the union blame and say it's an individual person that obviously made a mistake. I don't know if that's the case, but like just trying to come up with some creative. We don't love that idea, but we're trying to like keep the union afloat, which I do think serves a really good purpose. Like that could be one thing, but really trying to, like Christine was talking about, fix the in situation, like and sort of settlement, say you do all these things, but I don't know, the whole situation was yucky.
Which is the official term is yucky, yeah.
And difficult too, given that they had already said they were going to make changes, it's difficult to have that conversation.
So I think we also have an EEOC ALJ.
I think we were slightly confused about the role of the ALJ in this posture, like whether it's an ALJ or like a trial attorney in EEOC reviewing the case, but I think our general sense was that our client would be the public's interest in enforcing Title VII. And so that's what we would be concerned about, and it seems like companies flagrantly and the union are violating Title VII, and so we'd be interested in bringing our enforcement powers to bear, and addressing it,
To be fair, we might have assigned reading a bit more about Title saying you can do this, you can't do this, this is the definition of this is the definition of that, which we weren't going to do here. But there is more background, yes, definitely needed.
And then we have the legal advocates for women's rights, which is our.
Everybody in this room wants to be in their room.
First law firm representing the women.
We have our own issues though. Well, like who was our client? We have these individual women and we're deciding whether they'd be interested, whether we should try to do class certification in this case if there's enough people. But we have a lot of concerns about, our conflict is our view, this is a good case for precedent making, maybe good for our clients, maybe better for precedent making than for our clients.
Yeah.
And so we're righteous lawyers that want to make a point, but we don't want to forget what our clients need first and foremost. So there's a potential conflict there.
We would do a second round. I'm going to jump in really quickly.
But just the second round, just so you know, you would pass your note cards. So then you would take on a different role, right? And so you start to get that different perspective. And again, which shoes do you want to be in? Which shoes feel most comfortable for you? Sorry, just want to make sure that was
No,
clear.
definitely passing, and there's also, you can do a second round of different questions, after, maybe that's the third round, so there are ways to play with this. And the other thing is, news sources are getting really creative with different media. And for instance, this is the newspaper article this comes from.
This is where he would come up and smack me on my bottom. The day that really set me over the edge, I was loading a robot, and he walked into the same cell that I'm in and grabs my behind. I turned around to him and I said, keep your hands to yourself. As I've told you plenty of times before, I'm not interested.
In this particular article, there are a number of women. I'm not going to play any more bits, but these, as you can see, this is the women speaking in their own voices, and they cover a real range. And I think the question, was this racial harassment? The pictures make it pretty clear. There are 3 sets of these in this article, and they're all really compelling. So look for news sources that are starting to get kind of creative with this. This is the New York Times. And I think we're running low on time, so I'm going to step back again. And
Bring our PowerPoint back up.
yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. Sorry. No.
I think we'll keep going. We just did this thing.
So
So we take them, you talk, there's lots of ways you can do this after you've done the exercise with your class, right? What kinds of questions do you ask? Starting big, what was interesting, what was challenging, what was surprising? What roles made you feel conflicted? We talked about who is your client, what are your obligations to your client, and we'll give you this whole thing if you really want to do this. We'll give you all the materials you need to do it. If you thought you wanted to end the harassment as your first thing, what approaches are going to be most effective for that? And then this who, do you see anything like this? Who's most like somebody at your placement? And then for me, it's thinking about, and who do you want to be, right? Do you want to be, and you see when you're in the corporation or in the law firm, the difficult places that you're going to be, because you're not getting to choose what comes in your door for the most part. You're taking, as a corporation, what happens, as a law firm who pays you to do the work. There's choice over here about what cases to take. But I think helping students understand what's working in certain places means, and the kinds of challenging social justice issues that can come up. Which role you like, everybody in this room, I know what role you wanted to be, but, helping students walk through that. There's lots of ways you can go with these questions.
yeah. And then we wanted to get your feedback on the exercise. Sure. So we'd like to know your thoughts, and if we have your email, we'll send them around if they turn out to be a good list.
Yeah, anything you would do differently, or do you like it? Is it effective? Would it work in your mixed? We're again thinking of a mixed class. We got people in all kinds of different placements, and do you force the groups do you force people to take a different view? Do you let them be in mixed groups?
So I'm wondering, because I have a sense, and in more recent years, the students are very persuaded by real life scenarios and facts. And I wonder if they would feel at all deceived being given this as a fictional problem and afterwards being told that this is real life.
Yeah.
Has that happened?
We created this, I mean, we really did stick pretty close to the facts, and I would tell them this is based on something real.
Okay.
Yeah, but you want a fictional, I mean, you want to play with it a little bit, tweak the scenario to get it to where you want to go, get the roles to where you want them to go. So that's why you might be playing with it and want to make it fictional, but based on, what is it Joe Friday used to say? Lives of the, I can't remember, I'm going way back.
Just
Just
facts.
Okay.
And I think that's why we wanted to show that article, because I think the risk of making it fictional makes it just like reading a appellate case.
Right.
So kind of bringing it back to, this is something that happened very recently.
In Chicago, by the way, just shout out to Chicago.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I had a hard time figuring out the role, why we have the ALJ in, because it doesn't seem like that's the posture the case is in. And so I understand why it was complicated and it was difficult for you to answer the questions.
Two things, they did file both EEOC and district court. In both cases, the settlement happened first in the EEOC and eventually the district court. I'm not sure if this one has actually been dismissed, but ultimately does get dismissed because of issues of how the law plays out about what you can do in certain Title VII actions. What was I going to say? There was something else. The epilogue is in your handout, so you can read how it played out in the end in real life, and I would have students look at that at the end. But yes, I mean, and the union, I mean, we were really trying to look at pressure points where it would get difficult. Yes.
I find myself dealing with sort of aggrieved corporate law firm student, who's going to feel like this is an attack on them, or, how do you make them to feel better about what they're, going to do. I would have a hard time using this, I think, because students would, feel very like, you're telling me I'm going to be the bad guy.
See, I would go back to, but you have a chance to make things better, right? You have a chance to say, settle, do the right thing, institute training. I mean, the things that I say to students who end up going, they want to do employment work and they end up going to work in-house or for a firm, and say, well, then be the good person who does that, right? Don't defend every bad action just because you could under the law. I mean, I guess, but you're right, I mean, there's that danger, but I also think, boy, they'd rather think about that now than when they're in the job and hating it or, facing those things firsthand. I want them at least to think about, yes, they're going to be asked to do some things they aren't going to be real happy about. That's part of the job.
I wonder if to address that issue, and also to make it more, I really liked this exercise, but I wonder if you could introduce a little bit of like factual ambiguity, like have,
I think so,
voice,
yeah.
The supervisor, this was all horseplay, this was all fun, like they laughed, we were all friends,
Right.
just maybe, I really liked this exercise, but I could see some students.
Because if you're at the corporation when you're first investigating, you don't necessarily, if you're the CEO, you aren't on the factory floor, and so you're trying to figure out whose story is true, right?
Even when you gather these stories, there are they're human stories, and so there's always ambiguities there, and so that might make it more.
Yeah, I mean,
Good point.
it's a really rich article, but I wouldn't give it to the students first. I wanted, because I wanted them to figure out what they might have to do in their roles, which would probably be a different role than they usually play. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that all the different groups could maybe a more explicit, think about, you want to be a good person, you want to do social justice or whatever you want to call it, think about what you're going to do in that position. So that everybody can feel good about their role in the different arenas. But, and struggle through what that would mean.
Right. Yeah, the EEOC was difficult. We were trying to get some kind of judicial role in there, and there were both judicial and district court roles. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I said that, but yes.
Yeah, in the front.
I agree with what you just said. I think I would really simplify this exercise. Because I could see my students, spending all this time trying to understand corporate law and EEOC law and Title VII. They'd get so caught up in kind of the law that they'd lose sight, I think, of the what you're trying, the social justice piece of it. So I think if you just simplified it so that it was just, here's the situation, here's your role. Whatever you're going to think about, rather than having to really, like you had all these experienced lawyers sitting here saying, we don't even know where our client is. And that's not the point so much as.
And all the roles have good and bad sides, like even us, we righteous people.
Yeah, when you read all the roles, you realize it's not always so
Yeah,
easy
it's
to do
not.
these guys
It's not
necessarily.
So this comment is slightly off topic of what you had asked, but I would love, it seemed like it would be so great to have some, if this case ended up in settlement, it wouldn't work, but some case that ended up, that was in the public eye, but ended up in an opinion. If there's any way that, I think the exercise works really well to get it introduced in a doctrinal class, even where you're getting them to actually think about the different roles that are available, or even in the first year class to get them to think what happened, all the things that happened before the appellate case came to be, but you still could be teaching the doctrine, but with all this other background. I think it is a good fit for an externship teacher crossover into the classroom, so that we're trying to look for those opportunities, right?
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I was going to throw out, we have a lot of students who are former military, and so I could see switching this scenario and using it as sexual harassment in the military, which I think is a little more timely for some of these students and something they can understand, so.
That's a great idea. So you have the materials, we've given them to you in addition to lots of other class exercises and bibliographies about different things. So you've been great, thank you everybody. We won't keep you past 5:30, I promise.